So there are a lot of changes in voting laws occurring around the country, but North Carolina has been the focus of a lot of press coverage and national debate, even in the presidential campaign. And our question is there something special about North Carolina that makes it such a prominent battleground for this issue?
You start out with a tough question. Yes, there are a lot of things special about North Carolina. It's the variety of vacation land. We start with that. And it was one of the original colonies of the United States, and so it's been developing in many ways through the years. And it has a lot of history, both ways, good and bad. And it's a very important state. Somewhere we're now number 11 or something like that in the nation from the top. And we have a variety of industries and things of that nature. And have had some really interesting politics through the years. We could go way back into history, but I won't do that. But we could just start with maybe around the 19th and 20th centuries and come forward to today. But you probably have that information anyway, so I won't go into it. But everything helps if you understand it in the context of history. And that's the first point that I want to make. And I'll go ahead and get to your more specific questions.
All right. So there's a pretty specific history with voting, especially in North Carolina, and tied to the Civil Rights Movement. And we're here in Greensboro, and the city is famous for the cities that took place here. And do you feel that the civil rights history is connected to why North Carolina stays a prominent factor in voting issues even today?
Yes, it does. And I'm trying to see where to start, but I'll just talk a little bit, and then we'll get to try to answer your questions maybe more specifically. We had what I call the fusion period of politics in North Carolina, which was in the late 1890s and continued maybe up until close to the turn of the 20th century. And it's when the farmers and various others came together and took over the state from what had been very strong, I guess, Democratic dominance. And that lasted for only until around the 1899, 2000, when the Democrats came back in and took over with a very racist campaign, really, led by the man who became the governor. And things changed, but during the previous period, during that fusion period, voting was easy. For the times, I better throw that in. And a lot of people participated, including former slaves who participated in the registration and the voting and in public office at the city, county, and state level in North Carolina. And right around that time, 2000, not 2000, good Lord, 1900. Be sure I get my dates. If I said, I hope I had it said 1890s to start with, not 1990s, right, 1890s. Having lived in 2 centuries, I get them mixed up sometime. But, and with that change, frankly, the Democrats took over, and it was a fairly racist kind of thing for a good while. And they took away almost the black vote, for example. And that lasted for a long time. And just to sort of jump forward to the various things that occurred during the years, different administrations, and since I talked about how bad the Democrats were back then, several Democrats kind of led to begin to open things up a lot more during the 1950s and 60s and in those periods. So, but to just get more to modern times, and if you want to stop me and do it, because I get started talking sometime and don't know when to quit answering a particular question. I think the 1965 Voting Rights Act was one of the most important things in terms of registering and voting and giving people not only an opportunity to vote, but also prohibiting a lot of bad things that had happened in terms of people registering to vote. And as a result of that act, it became fairly easy for most people to register and vote in North Carolina and many other states, primarily in the South, where the African-American vote had been curtailed by all kinds of legislative and other acts that tended to prevent people from registering and voting. And one of the most powerful parts of that act was the one that required that states where the registration and voting, and I'm being general, did not reach certain levels on a certain date before they could make a change, before the county or the city or the state could make a change in their voting or registration procedures, it had to be cleared through the Attorney General of the United States with the Civil Rights Division of all parts. And so this became a very hot and contested thing in the South and some in some other places, but I'm talking now primarily about the South and especially North Carolina. And so it allowed a lot of people to register and vote, and it became easy to register and vote in North Carolina, and that was going fine here and in several southern states. Well, then here comes along a Supreme Court decision declaring a part of the act invalid, and it was the part that, without going into detail again, that essence of which ended up being that you no longer had to submit a change in your registration and voting laws to the Attorney General of the United States. You could just go on and change them. And then if people didn't like it, they could file a lawsuit. Well, one of the main reasons for the Voting Rights Act with the provision that required that was that trying to get your rights established through the courts was a long and tedious journey. And so you could file a lawsuit today and it may be 10 years before you get relief. And so the Voting Rights Act just took away most of that. You didn't have to wait. You know, this is it. You can't do this, you can't do this, you can do this, and you can't do that, and so forth. And so that just changed it altogether in North Carolina and several states, especially the southern states, again, I'm sorry to say, since I'm from the South. And by the way, helped with the establishment of the Southern Growth Policies Board. I won't get into that when I was in the legislature. But so that's that history, and so that then allowed states and cities and counties who wanted to just go ahead and make changes, some of which were very restrictive. And then you had to file a lawsuit again in order to try to change it. And so that's the bad part of the history as far as well, a part of the bad part of the history as far as I'm concerned. I'll stop at that and let you ask some more questions.
Yeah, I find it really interesting. You had said that the Voting Rights Act opened up registration in 1965, but we were reading your story of how you went to register to vote in 1956 on your wedding day. And we found it really interesting that it was that specific day, your wedding day, that moment in your life. And can you speak to why on that day, like, did you decide to go register to vote?
All right. This is now before the Voting Rights Act, remember? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. In the rural counties especially, registration time was very limited. And so you might be able to register 2 Saturdays in July, August. And if you didn't register on those days, you had to wait until the next time they opened registration. All right. Well, this was in August, and I was to get married. I was in a little town called Ellaby, Richmond County, and I was coming to Greensboro to get married, and I wasn't going to get married until the afternoon. So I said, this is a Saturday morning. I found out that the registration was open, so I said, I believe I'll register to vote, because that was my hometown. And you probably have seen a lot written about that, that I was asked a lot of questions about irrelevant things as far as the requirements for registering and voting. And when I didn't answer the questions, the person told me I couldn't register. I didn't pass. And so I left, and the minister, who was also from Ellaby and we had been together in school and who was going to marry us in Greensboro that day, went in. He got the same treatment. So neither one of us were able to register that morning on our my wedding day before we came to Greensboro. So that's that story. And
so you had already done research. You knew what you needed
oh, yeah.
to do to register, and you knew that they weren't following.
I knew it. Yes. Under the statutes and Constitution together at that time, you had to be able to read and write any section of the North Carolina Constitution. And I think at that time there was a provision to the satisfaction of the registrar or something. They may have, not in the Constitution, but in the statute. It had been in there, and I don't know whether they'd taken it out at that particular time. But clearly, those questions about the signers of the Declaration of Independence and things of that nature just had nothing to do with it. But it was in a book. Oh, I take that back. He said he was reading from a book on those questions. And so, by the way, I had been admitted to law school at the University of North Carolina at that time, and he knew it, because I asked him afterward. I went back in because I had been in service in Korea and Japan, and first lieutenant by that time, by the way. And then I couldn't find a job in Ellaby or Greensboro that I thought I wanted, so I went to New York and worked for about 6 months or so. And so I said, you don't have any doubt that I'm a resident of Richmond County. He said, oh no, I know your mother and father, and you're the one been admitted to go to law school. Could you imagine that? I said, well, if you know, I said to myself, if you know all that, you're gonna turn me down. I don't believe you're gonna let many black folk register to vote in this area. And I was right, he didn't. But anyway, we straightened that out later on.
How long did it take you to straighten it out?
Well, again, remember we came to Greensboro and I got married, so yeah. I was away for a while. But when I finally came back, I went to see the chair of the Board of Elections and told him what had occurred. And he apologized. And he said, if you'll go back, I don't think you'll have a problem. And he was right. I went back. They had a new registrar, nice-looking elderly lady. And she had me to copy the part of the Constitution, which was what she could legally do. And I wrote it, and she looked at it. She said, "You got it right. You passed." So I registered and started voting, and the other person did too. But to his credit, the chair of the Board of Election and the sheriff of the county began to take action to see that that type of thing did not continue to occur. Now, I have to check that, I better check my facts. I said the sheriff, I'm not sure it was the same sheriff that was in that day that I went down, or whether it was the new sheriff came right after that, but the new sheriff made it a practice of trying to help people get registered to vote, especially blacks, many of whom had not registered. And some of them had the kind of difficulty that I had, one of whom, who really could barely read and write, got a lot of newspaper publicity. And I don't know how many times he went, and before he was able to satisfy the registrar that he was qualified and, able to read and write. That's a long answer than you expected, I expect. But at any rate, it's something that I think about deeply when I talk about it.
And is that experience why you got so interested in public service? did that influence your career decision?
Well, I already had that interest. And I'll give you one of the things in the background that helped me with that. When I was in service in either Japan or Korea at that time, I've forgotten, there was a another officer, and I talked. I met him, and we were just talking about his weekends. And he said, "Well, I spent a good part of my weekends teaching people how to read and write, and most of them were military prisoners." And I said, "Oh yeah." I said, "How much you get paid for that?" He said, "Paid?" Said, "I'll do it for free." And we had a long talk about public service, and that had a lot to do with that, plus some other people that I had talked to. That you got to give something back. You gotta, if you're fortunate enough to have some ability and to do well, you sort of owe it to your fellow man to give something back to others. And I've stayed with that most of my life.
Moving a little forward, so when the Voting Rights Act was passed, it was the summer of 1965,
Yes.
and you're working as an assistant U.S. attorney. What were your colleagues' opinions towards the Voting Rights Act at the time?
Now let me see, in 1965, maybe you've checked it out, I've forgotten, the years may have mixed up a little bit on me. There wasn't a lot of strong action in North Carolina as soon as it came out. Let me just put it that way, that much I remember. But it was also during those times that we began to have some sit-ins and things of that nature. Well, they started in 1960, but it continued in terms of trying to get public combinations open and trying to just get away from discrimination on the basis of race in dealing with the military. Not the military, I mean with the, because the military was ahead of us, as a matter of fact, which is another story. But to try to get things better in North Carolina in terms of getting rid of racial things, from the graveyard all the way to swimming pools. And we had the public accommodations national legislation at that time too, the Civil Rights Acts, which together people were working on. And they had these things like the sit-ins, you know, at the Woolworths and 10-cent stores and things of that nature. And then it spread to others in terms of employment. And so we had all of those things going on at that time. And of course, in the 65, in that general area, I was still young and trying to make a living and trying to practice law. So I was not as active as probably some people thought I should have been in a lot of the civil rights activities as such. I have to admit that I spent a lot of time talking with people who were involved in it, and in fact, most of the time encouraging them in what they were doing.
So throughout your biography, you know, we've read quite a bit about your life story, and you're very much a trendsetter for, you know, you become a role model for a lot of African Americans going into public service in North Carolina. You were the first in the U.S. Attorney, first U.S. Assistant Attorney, and then in the legislature and Supreme Court throughout your life. Do you see that as a form of activism? Because I'm curious when you said that people didn't think you were as active as you should have been.
Well, I guess we thought of activism as you know, grand and you know, and all this, you know, which is a form of activism and sometimes makes a great change. But mine was more quietly and more behind the scenes, and conferring with people about how to get things done that they wanted to do at that particular time. And one thing I want to do be very careful with, you mentioned about the first African American in the legislature. That was elected in the 20th century.
Yes.
Because we had blacks during the 1890s, you know, I told you about that. And then there were blacks in the legislature right shortly after the Civil War in North Carolina. That was another time when we had blacks there. So we had blacks in the legislature shortly after the Civil War during the Reconstruction period. And then it went almost out, not completely, but almost out. Then it came back during the Fusion period, and then went out again around the turn of the 20th century. And not a great deal of progress from then up until the Civil Rights Movement started for real in the middle of the 20th century.
I'm curious, especially considering everything that happened in the 1890s with the Fusionist campaign and some of the men behind it, like Charles Aycock. Today I remembered as, he's remembered as the education governor, but we forget his association with the white supremacy campaign and the Wilmington race riots. How does that, affect, or how does that make you feel to see people forget this, such a crucial aspect, a portion of North Carolina's history?
Well, people who are very active in it don't forget it. I think they look at it, and I don't mind telling you that I praise him for insisting that we have education for both black and white. I condemn him for taking the racist attitude that he did about it. But some say that was the times, but everybody didn't take that attitude. So I'm, you know, there's good and bad. And I think we praise him for the good things that he did, but at the same time, he certainly was not a model of the kind of leadership in the area of race relations and the area of being open and inclusive. So that's about as good as I can say about it.
Moving forward to your time in the legislature, I had read that your first priority was to remove the literacy test.
Yes.
And I was really interested in how that was received by your fellow legislators. Was that something that people could get behind, and did you start it, or was it something that you had to kind of fight more for and it was more controversial?
Let me take 2 or 3 minutes on that.
Yeah.
That was my first priority in terms of getting it through the legislature, okay? And as you know, to get it through the legislature, you have to have a supermajority. And so we had a little book that the telephone company printed with the names of all of the legislators in it, those in the House and then one for the Senate. And so I had the book with the picture and the phone number. I knew where they were from and all like that. And so I just went to each legislator in the House, which is where I was, the House of Representatives, and talked to them about it and said, you know, could I depend on your support to get rid of it, to abolish it? And I had 3 columns, yes, no, and question mark. And so I went through every legislator in the House, and I had some in every category. Very few who said, I'm going to fight it, although some of them did pretty strongly. But that's the way I did it. And so when I introduced the bill, and then before we brought it to the floor of the House, I knew that if 90% of the people who said they were going to vote for it would vote for it, that it would pass. And that happened, and it passed the House. And the newspaper article said that they passed it in the House to kill it in the Senate. And I did the same thing for the Senate. I got my list and everything, but I also got the list there of the committee to which it was going. And I also talked with a particular leader in the Senate who I thought would be very helpful to me. And he said, don't let them bring it up until I tell you. And when he did, he told me what to do. And the committee in the Senate, you can send the bill out favorable, or you can send it with unfavorable, or you can send it without prejudice. So he said, let it come out without prejudice. That's the only way you're gonna get it out of the committee. And so that's what they did. They went to the floor of the Senate, and they passed it just as if it was normal, everyday things. So the legislature, I accomplished what I wanted in the legislature, and it went to the people, and either the executive committee or some small committee of the North Carolina Bar Association recommended that the people vote for it. I was in that meeting, but when it got to the larger group, I was not there, and they took that away and did not ask that you vote for it. And so it failed in the election the following year. So it was still in the Constitution the last time I looked at it. Mm-hmm. Now it's the Voting Rights Act sort of took care of it mostly, and I don't even know what the status of it is now. I don't think it's active. I really haven't looked at it lately, but I think it's still in the. It was in the statute last year. I haven't looked at it recently.
I'm curious, you had these one-on-one conversations with other legislatures.
Mm-hmm.
Did race play into these conversations?
Was it what?
Did race and the racial aspect of the literacy test play into these conversations? Sometimes.
Mostly no. Okay. Mostly those who were for it would say, I'm for it, and those who were against it would say, I'm against it, except there were some who said, well, Henry, I don't know. You know, I got to check with my people back home. And those, I put those in the question mark category. But we had mostly not a lot of conversation about it. Now, there was, in every case where you got something controversial, there are a few people that you have a good long discussion with. And so we had those discussions. And when it came up in the House for a vote, I didn't mention race or anything. I just told about why people should be able to register to vote and vote because it's a fundamental thing for people, the voteless people, the hopeless people, as they say. And it was going great until one legislator who was opposed to it did what I expected him to do. Well, he got up and just talked about it. Didn't have anything to do with race. It was just, and he just made this long speech and everything. And then I told him about my experience. And when I finished with my experience and they got through, somebody said, I moved the question. All in favor say, not say I don't remember, I think it was a vote. It had to be, I forgot now, I think it had to be a recorded vote. So that ended the discussion about that and passed. That was it.
Voting rights now is such a partisan issue. Was there a split between the parties on the issue at this time?
Not, well, there may have been with the parties, but in the legislature, I had Democrats and Republicans split. And I don't think either party, as far as I know, I don't know that either party took a position as such on it. But it was an individual type of thing. And I felt pretty good getting my bill through. A lot better than one other bill I had that I wanted and I couldn't get through, which was the landlord-tenant bill, to get, in essence, to adopt a very strong bill giving tenants a lot more rights than they had at that particular time. And that failed, so then we broke the act into different parts, and we would bring up one part and that we thought we could get a positive vote on and get that through, and then the next legislature we came back again with another part, and we finally brought that law into what was then the 20th century, because before the landlord-tenant law in North Carolina was based sort of on old English, what do you call it, whatever, I've forgotten the name of it, which was just absolutely terrible. Poor tenant didn't have a right to stand on. The term I used was he didn't have a leg to stand on. If the person, just no right. And several of us didn't think that was right. So we we finally got that changed. Now we've gotten off the subject, but go ahead.
Going back a little bit, you talked about that there was a little bit of pushback to get rid of the literacy tests.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to see what did why was there pushback? What was the reasoning given by politicians at the time?
Well, some said that a person needed, if a person couldn't read and write, that you didn't want them to vote. You don't want people voting, they said, a person who doesn't understand what's going on, you know, who doesn't, they said that people can round them up and get them to vote either way they want to and things of that nature. That was the kind of argument that I got. And the argument was that if people could read and write, they could understand, you know, what the laws were and be more intelligent about voting and everything. And I said, well, yes, but I still think that it's important for everybody who meets the requirements and doesn't have a criminal at that time and didn't have a, I started to say criminal, probably better, didn't have a felony, you know, could register and vote, and that's the way it ought to be. And that view actually prevailed. My view, I mean that view, yes.
And what is it about a vote that's so symbolic that it needs to be for, you know, for everyone? Is it, because it's more than just a conversation about, I don't know, it's sometimes, a lot of times voting and conversation stands apart from civil rights or rights in general. And can you speak at all to like why vote is that simple?
Well, I need a half hour, but I'll try to see if I can do it in a few minutes. You see,
big question.
We don't have a pure democracy, right? Mm-hmm. We have a representative democracy, right? Where we elect somebody to represent us, to make the laws and to carry those laws out. So the person who has a right to vote has a right to challenge the person who votes differently from the way that person thinks you should vote. And so if you have a mass of people who can't vote, if you're a representative elected by these people over here, and those folk don't have anything to say about it, who are you going to look out for? Right? I mean, that's the practicalities of it. So that's why the vote is so important. And you can if you don't like what the person's doing, the next election you run somebody against that person, and if enough people don't like it, they can vote that new person in to replace this one, and that's the whole idea of the. And I say this, I call it a representative democracy. It's also called a Republican form of government, where again, the basic idea is that you elect people to represent you. You have different branches of the government, some for making the laws, others for seeing that those laws are carried out, and then a third branch which settles disputes when there's a question about the law or something of that nature.
Bringing that question around to the law that passed in 2013 and the new voting restrictions, you know, people in favor of the law talk about how it protects from fraud, and it's actually protecting, you know, the essence and this, the importance of a vote, because people shouldn't be able to fraudulently vote. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering what your response to that would be, that whether, you know, in their minds it's worth it to accidentally, you know, make it harder for people to vote to protect it.
One of the things that I was in the legislature for 14 years, and one of the things that I worked on the whole 14 years was trying to open up the right to register and vote, and not to prevent people from registering and voting. Now, we had those arguments back then that there may have been some fraud. I said, well, that's why you got people to investigate and look into things. And so they investigated and they looked into it. And what did they find? I've forgotten the percentage, 1/10 or something, that's of where you may have somebody who's voting who was not qualified. Well, that person's not going to make an effect on the whole voting system, on the whole thing. Now, if you'd found 10% fraud, then you would have something to argue about. But I have not seen any statistics in North Carolina where it was such that you had a very high amount of fraud. So I would much rather see 3 people who registered and voted who didn't have a right to register and vote than to have 1,000 people who are kept from registering and voting because you make the thing so tight and so improper that they can't get out and register and vote. And I feel very strongly about it, and I worked on it the whole time I was in. That was one of my main things on the elections committee, so we could work on getting things done. One of the things they used to do was put the primaries way ahead of the voting time, you know, so that there were different reasons for doing that. And then there was another movement to put it right closer to it, you know, so that, and usually there was a reason, you know, that the people had for it. And restrictions, see, you can have restrictions in 2 areas, where you can have restrictions for the primaries with the parties, which we've had cases on that for years and years and years. And then you can have it with the registering and voting itself. In other words, not to get it. See, at one point, the Democratic Party, that was my party, I don't mind telling you. At one point, the Democratic Party fixed ways to keep blacks from participating in the primary because they were running North Carolina and a good part of the South, and they didn't want blacks to register and vote. So what they did was we had the Democratic primary, and then you had to bring lawsuits to get a right, even though you could register and vote. You didn't have a voice in the Democratic primary. And so with some lawsuits and various other things, they finally got that changed before I came along so that the party opened up, you know, with it. And because it was in North Carolina and the South, generally it was the party of the people. I mean, you know, the white people. I mean, let's put it bluntly. Don't get me stirred up, not too much.
But we're talking about the right to vote and how certain people are qualified.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that a person has to have some sort of qualification to vote, or can anybody vote?
If you are of the required age, you meet the geographic requirements of living in that particular area, and your citizenship has not been taken away because you committed a felony, then by George, you ought to be able to register and vote. And that's the way I look at it. And by the way, a whole lot of us had that same idea back when I was in the legislature, and so we opened things up, made it easier for people to register and vote.
So moving a bit forward to what's happening today.
Yeah.
So it's been almost 8 years since President Obama was elected, with the hope of uniting the country and including bridging a lot of racial divisions. Why do you think voting rights and racial distrust are major issues in this country as we near the end of the Obama presidency?
Now ask the last sentence again so I can be sure what you're asking.
So why do you think voting rights and racial distrust are major issues in the country as we near the end of the Obama presidency?
This isn't the first time, by the way, that it's been that way. Let me get that out of the way. But unfortunately, he has not been able to really unite the country. I don't think it's all his fault. He's got some faults, like almost every president, I guess, maybe. In fact, I'd say all of them, but people kind of accept George Washington, you know. But and the opposition seems to magnify everything that he does that they disagree with, and I don't want to spend much time on this, but the thing that he had, about he wasn't an American citizen because he wasn't born in the United States, and that just went on and on and on, and finally the registrar came, look, here's his original birth certificate, you know, and it satisfied everybody except one or two people who are very prominent, whose names I will not call, but who are still in the news. I mean, in the issues now that we just, I'm not happy about the way things are going. And I'm just hoping that somehow people who are reasonable all the way around and something will try to find a way to make things a little better and get a little better understanding and a way to work together. And I guess this is a good point to throw in a little organization called the Institute of Political Leadership, IOPL, which is the North Carolina, whose purpose is to improve the practice of democracy in North Carolina. And it is a nonpartisan organization, which includes Democrats, Republicans, various minority parties, and individuals who are unaffiliated, who are working and training a group of people who we hope will be able to help improve the democracy in the state of North Carolina. Small organization, nonprofit. I was chair of it for a couple of years. I'm no longer chair, but I'm still on the board. And I hope people will look it up, because when I talk to people and tell them what it's trying to do, almost everybody says it's a great thing to do. So I'll tell you all, if nobody else pays any attention, get on the internet and look up IOPL, North Carolina. You've already found it. Very good, very good.
I saw the old interview you did that you talked about it.
Yeah, and there's a song which I'm sure you've heard, said, "Little things mean a lot." It does. Little things mean a lot. We do right now about 20 people twice a year for 11 weeks of training in everything from how to file a financial report to ethics, how to make public speaking and things of that nature, and discussing the issues and how to discuss the issues and disagree without being disagreeable. And but 40 people are not enough to really make the big dent that we would like to make. But I got to say one more thing, then I'll leave that alone. But the Chief Justice of North Carolina is a graduate of that program. Our Secretary of State is a graduate of that program. Our State Treasurer was a member, but she's no longer the State Treasurer. But she was. So we have people, and there's another member of the court, Supreme Court, who went through the program, I believe, and some on the Court of Appeals, and a lot of people who are in public service right now in North Carolina. And we need to find a way to improve the practice of democracy in North Carolina, and it takes time, but we got to work on it. Now you got another question.
So another thing that I find really interesting is there's all this talk about partisanship at the federal and state levels, that a lot of bills have been unable to pass in the Senate and in the House. When you were in the legislature, was it as partisan as it is now, or do you think this is a recent development?
Oh, let's see. Now you're talking about nationally now or state?
The state.
Oh, the state. You back to the state.
Yeah, especially with your experience doing a lot of the laws regarding voting and opening up elections. Did you face partisan issues?
Oh yeah, there were partisan issues, but there were times when we finally would come together again, a group of people who would get together in the legislature and say, look, it's time on this issue. It's time for us to do what's good for North Carolina, and it happened. Now it wasn't as often as I would like to have seen it, but the partisan politics is nothing new. I mean, I told you I went all the way back to the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. You had it way back then, and we're going to have it now. But somehow we've also got to find a way to work together to get things done. In other words, and I'll just throw out this. I'm trying to think of what was the, oh yeah, I mentioned with the Voting Rights Act that the change that the Supreme Court of the United States made by declaring a part of it invalid. Getting back to North Carolina and a lot of states, the very next week they began to change the laws because they didn't have to get pre-approval from the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. I've forgotten there was another one that, again, that the Supreme Court of the United States gave that kind of opened things up more probably than I think it should. But that's a matter of opinion, you know, and people were on both sides, and so and that's the political system. But there's no question in my mind that you ought to open up the registering and voting to every citizen who meets those basic qualifications and give them a chance. And I've told several people who said they weren't going to vote because it wasn't going to make any difference. I said, that's a defeatist attitude, you know. A lady came and congratulated me when I lost my first election and said, I meant to vote for you. I said, oh, you didn't vote? She said, no, the washing machine was out of order and the man was supposed to come to fix it. And I thought he was coming in the morning, he didn't get there, and I thought he was gonna come. By the time he got there, it was too late for me to register to vote. I said, lady, I see that you were really a supporter of mine. You know, I've tried to get people to see the importance of not only registering, but then voting, to express your opinion. And I used to go to the barber shop. I go now sometimes, but people would come in there and they would be talking about this and that and what's right and wrong. I said, where do you vote? Oh, I don't vote. I said, I don't want to hear a thing you got to say. I said, you go register to vote and then you have a right to talk about what's right and what's wrong with the political system. And maybe I better quit.
So looking at the Shelby decision, Justice Roberts said that race was no longer an issue when it came to voting. How do you respond to that?
Are those his exact words?
No, but not in so many words.
Yeah, not so many words.
I don't want to get in a position of criticizing a specific member of the court who I happen to know and happen to participate on a panel with and various other things. I don't want to get into personalities.
Right. To make the question, I guess, more general. We've talked about how there's been transitions and time periods in this issue, and you had mentioned in the past that people said it was for the time. It was, well, that's just the times. It was, and it gets chalked up to a moment in history. And I guess the question asked more broadly is, do you think that this issue was of the history, a moment in the 60s or 70s of the past, or do you think that race is still an intrinsic part of voting rights, I guess?
Give me one question, without the other, because I'm trying to focus on specifically what you're talking about.
Sure. It's just, is the tie between voting rights and race a product of times, of history, of a specific moment, or is it just inherently connected?
It's historical, and if you start with the history and bring it all the way up, in the United States, people weren't kept in slavery because they wanted to be. That was the feeling of the times. That was what was going on, right? And then slowly but surely we began to do things to change it. Some people led it, others went along with it, others fought it. It's the same thing with ideas these days, not these days, but it's always been, I guess, that there are people who have a feeling of what ought to be in, either because they think it's right or because they have an advantage by it being a certain way, right? And I don't think that has changed. I think that remains. So those who want to change have to convince enough people that what is going on is wrong and ought to be corrected, either because it's going to be good for the country or because in the long run it's going to be good for them. And if you can convince enough people of that, then you can make the kind of change that you want to make. And so I think that's the way I look at it.
A lot of people look at this law that just passed and see it as a reversion or a step backwards, back into the 60s, back into a time.
Yeah. Now you said this law.
These new voting restrictions with ID and shortened early voting period, things like that. Do you feel that this is progress coming undone?
Yes,
Yes,
without
absolutely.
question. Without question. I think those who feel that you've got to have all these restrictions and make it difficult, really, for people who are not very sophisticated, and in fact, sometimes some of them who are sophisticated have difficulty with it. And the more confusion there is, the less people are going to register and vote. So it's not automatic one way or the other. You know, it's people. People make the difference. And if you got the right leadership and then the people working on it and working together, you can make things better. Now, I hasten to say that, going over time, if you talk about centuries, we're in a much better time today than we were 100 years ago. I mean, in terms of the country and things of that nature. But we have those times when I think we're sort of going in the wrong direction. And some of us are trying to change it and get it in the right direction.
Do you worry about a general apathy, especially among young people? You've talked a couple of times about, I meant to go vote, or I feel this way, but I didn't go vote. Do you worry that this will play into this issue? If if the court now, and then if it makes it to the Supreme Court, that's a whole different story. But if this law remains, do you worry that people will just accept it?
No,
Okay.
I don't worry about that. I think that we are a little more intelligent today than we were 100 years ago. I think that we are more conscious of it. I think we're more conscious of other people's rights and things of that nature. Or when I say we, I mean a larger percentage of people. And so I think that, I guess the best way I know how to do is, which way is the pendulum going? And I think it's going up rather than down. Now, right now, some people would say, well, how in the world can you say that? I'm looking not just 2 years, but I'm looking kind of toward the future, And one of our problems, of course, is that people who feel about things in a way that are progressive sometimes sort of drop the ball and say, oh, well, I'm doing okay and my children doing okay and everything, and I don't believe I want to get into all of this, so I'm just going to take it easy. And I don't like that attitude. And if you tell me that, you get a good lecture from me.
And just another quick question about voting. Do you, a lot of people, there's all these more Monday protests, and now the case has gone to the Supreme Court of North Carolina. Do you think the pushback to this law is a symptom of the progress that has been made regarding voting rights in the state?
Well, I'm sure. And I don't want to get into what the Supreme Court of North Carolina will do. You know, having served on that court, and I don't want to get into that.
Of course.
You know, if I felt strongly enough, I might sign a brief or something, or be a. But anyway, I better not get into that. I got plenty to do, so I don't need to get directly involved with it. But it's a difficult situation now, and especially with I guess are you talking about the I've forgotten the case now that's coming before the court, but I would hate to have to make the decision as to whether to recuse. See, one of the problems with a court is supposed to be neutral, right? And if it would affect you personally, generally you recuse. Or if the other members of the court think that it will affect you personally, sometimes they will vote to recuse you if you don't. And now I'm talking not just about the Supreme Court of North Carolina, but courts in other places. In Pennsylvania, they had to do that. I say they had to do that. There was a member of the court who was going to be directly affected by, I think it was Pennsylvania, some court, by something. And they suggested that he recuse, and the person said, no, I'm not going to recuse, I'm going to vote like everybody else. Well, that creates a problem, right? So ethics apply to the court just as they do to individuals. And you just, if you, if it's directly involving you, then of course you don't participate in the decision of the particular court. And to the credit, when the court that I was on, I don't remember any time where a person had that interest and still decided that they would not recuse themselves. And I say that I feel good about that. You know, there are things you feel good about and things you feel bad about, you know. And the law is a difficult area, and sometimes they're very tough decisions that have to be made. And hopefully we've got the right people on there. And reasonable people can differ as to what is the right thing to do in a given situation. And but again, I think the future is going to be brighter than the past.
Great. Is there anything that you wanted to say that you didn't get the chance to before we wrap up?
Well, don't give up when you're trying to do the right thing. Just keep on keeping on.
Great. Thank you so much for
Thank you
talking
so
with
much.
us.